Hello. So I'm going to start by actually disagreeing with Bill because actually 85% of ICOs failed. So if you were going to follow Bill on the ICO track, I'd suggest that you might want to think about whether you want to be in the 85% or the 15%. And Greg, about your trees and who checks them, well, guess what? As auditors, we get lots of people contacting us and asking us about trees. And we've had people ask us to confirm the validity of them. And that's actually a lot of what we're now starting to do about how we actually bring trust to blockchain and how do we actually make sure that the tokens that are being sold actually do exist. So very, very interesting questions and happy to move on from the riveting previous panel hosted by Mai, who I've got a lot of time for as well. So very, very briefly, ladies and gentlemen, because I also have to rush and catch a plane, sadly, I wanted to quickly start by just talking very quickly on how we at EY see web and Web 1, Web 2, Web 3, and how it's evolved. So we see Web 3 very much now as a many-to-many construct, as to allow the democratization, as we've just heard over there, be it of finance, be it of content, or be it of various other forms out there. And we see as an important piece of that, actually bringing that trust. Right, bringing that trust to the ecosystem. Many of you would recognize something like this. We're all trying to create our own nomenclature on different types of tokens, be it fungible or non-fungible. How do you start to break them down? How do you start to put them into different types? But key for us again is. It's not a theoretical exercise. We see this as an important exercise to be able to then understand what do people understand of these tokens, what are the expectations of them, and again, then how can we then bring that trust, right? And how can we provide that trust to the users or the people who might actually buy those tokens, who might be transacting with those tokens, or as Mai referred to, the lawyers, etc., who are looking at what these are and trying to figure out how they actually act. So, with that in mind, here we go. So, with that in mind, we've tried to pull together a global, an overall risk management framework. And for those of you who are sort of as old as I am, sadly, and remember things like Netscape and stuff like that, you will recognize that this is actually a pretty standard and traditional risk framework. And the reason why this is a pretty standard and traditional risk framework is because I'm very much of the view that while this is a brave new world that we are moving into, a lot of what we know and a lot of the tools that we have for risk management apply still, right? Let's not throw out the baby with the bathwater, to use that English phrase. So let's actually use a lot of what we already know. Governance, right? Oversight, or risk appetite of organizations. Do you know as an organization what you're going into? Do you have appropriate governance? Do you have appropriate oversight? What is your risk culture? What is your risk management framework? What is your risk management tools? What is your internal control framework? So if you're an exchange, somebody else can actually rely on you. Somebody else can actually trust you. All of that's pretty, 101 in the current world, right? But in the world that we are now moving into, be it the digital assets world or the distributed ledger world, etc., the key now is to understand how those risks may now manifest themselves differently. That's the special bit. So, 80% of these risks are traditional risks. People still sadly press wrong buttons, still sadly code incorrectly, but that might mean your smart contract might do something very different. Right? Your smart contract risk may not have existed before. That's something new. But how that might go wrong is actually a pretty traditional IT risk. Right? So to me, a lot of what we're trying to do at EY in terms of trying to bring trust to this space is to actually look at how firms, organizations, and for that matter, auditors, etc., can actually take risk management frameworks, bring them to form, look at the different risks that arise, and think about how those can then actually manifest. And so one of the things we try to do, for example, is look at the product life cycle. Think about, from the time when you are actually bringing on an asset or bringing on a client, and then all the way through to safekeeping that asset, settling that asset, servicing that asset, and the technology that would encompass all of this. Are you clear about, throughout those processes, what can happen, what can go wrong, and the risks that you are trying to mitigate, and the risks that you're trying to sort of allow for? And if you actually then look at some of the risk considerations on here, again, most of these are current risk considerations for those of you who are in finance at the moment. A lot of this will look very familiar to you. A lot of this will look very similar to you, although then there are some new ones on here, right? Key management risks, for example, the classic story of a firm putting its private key in escrow in case it goes bust, and then sadly when the firm does go bust, you go to the provider to get the key, and guess what? It doesn't work because it was corrupted, etc. Sadly, all of those are new risks. But if we think about, again, our current requirements that we have, we've got requirements for BCP, we've got requirements for operational resiliency, we've got requirements for continuity. All of those still exist. They just manifest themselves differently in potentially some of the blockchain world or some of the crypto world that we're operating in. Why? Because in the traditional finance world, most of the time, if anything went wrong during the week, you knew you had the weekend to sort things out. I've been involved in, sadly, numerous projects where, there's a mad series of activities at the weekend just to clear up reconciliations or clear up things that went wrong in the week. Doesn't exist for DLT, right? This is a 24/7, 365, constantly going, constantly moving world. You get it wrong, it's a mess. It's going to be difficult to rewind. It's going to be difficult to fill up. So those risks now manifest themselves slightly differently in the new world. But nevertheless, let's remember all the fact that actually all of this are things which we are already used to dealing with. And to me, a lot of the times people just go into some sort of oh my goodness, this is all new. I don't know what to do. But let's not forget that actually we do know what to do because a lot of these exist already in our current sphere and what we're trying to do. So to sort of pull it all together in terms of what we then would strongly suggest to firms to look at if you're a provider, if you are an exchange, if you're in this space, if you're trying to win money, if you're trying to raise money, if you're trying to get audited, trying to list, etc. Think about having proper internal controls in place. Think about it properly, design it front to back, make sure that it's working. Think about your assets. Be clear about custody of it. As we've discussed numerous times over the last 2 days, the devil is still in the detail. It's still in the contract until you read it all and know what you're actually buying. Like those people who bought that Dune book. I never forget that story. All of that sort of situation just keeps showing that you may not know what's happening. And then for the minute, because AML KYC regulation is where it bites, make sure that you're on top of that and make sure that if the regulation starts to grow, that you continue to be on top of that, because that, to me, is what's going to start to win the trust of your customers and win the trust of your clients and hopefully put you into a virtuous circle of growing your business and getting where you want to get to. Some ideas on the, I'm going to get my left and right wrong now. On the left side of the slide for me, in terms of some of the assurance type services that are out there now, smart contract analyzers, blockchain analyzers, SOC reports, etc. If you want to have a look at some of our tools, it's on blockchain.ey.com. You can play around with them. They're all free. You can upload a smart contract, your ERC20. It'll tell you what we think about it and some of the security issues just to have a look at as well. But just want to leave you with the thought that, to me, a lot of what we're suffering from is a trust deficit in this space, trying to think about how can we actually improve that and increase that. Thank you for listening and have a good afternoon.